Joining me now, First Class Fathers David Zucker and Jim Abrahams. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you got in a little bit on the end of my call with my son Charles. So that has something to do with fatherhood.
Yeah, well, way to kick it off there. We'll start with you there, David. I'm going to ask both of you. How many kids do you have? How old?
I have two. My son is 23 and my daughter is 21, so I can date her friends. Yes.
You got one and one. How about you, Jim?
I have three. The oldest son, 39, and a daughter, 37, and a son, 31.
Very cool. So let's start this just at the beginning of your fatherhood journeys here. David, how old were you when you first became a dad? Where were you at in your career, and how did that kind of change your perspective on life?
Well, my perspective on life was already pretty set. I was 52 when I had my first kid.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just been the most fun. I mean, I would recommend it to anyone. It's, my kids are still, Charles still lives here in LA, and my daughter is at the University of Wisconsin in her senior year in college.
Very cool. How about you, Jim?
I was 40 when we had our first kid, and he couldn't have come at a better time because David and Jerry and I had just finished and released our movie called Top Secret, and it tanked at the box office. And David and Jerry were really despondent and broken up about it. But, I was so into this new baby that it didn't make too much. I was fine with Top Secret bombing.
So it turned out for each subsequent tanking picture, Jim had another child.
Right.
So we're probably a couple of more after that.
Well, yeah, there are 10 or 12 other kids I didn't talk about.
That's right.
Okay, let me go someplace with this interview then. I wasn't planning, but you're talking about fatherhood a lot, and that's obviously your point of view. What really, I have my youngest kid when he was a baby, wound up with horrible epilepsy. And he sort of, in the end of the book, when it talks about what we did after Airplane, I go into it. But that really changed my career completely. That's when I sort of stopped being interested in the movie business and started advocating. Eventually, my son was cured of his epilepsy by something called a ketogenic diet, which I found on my own. It wasn't recommended by any of the doctors we took him to see. They drugged him and operated on his brain, but never mentioned diet to us. And so when I came across the diet and when it cured his epilepsy, that changed my whole life around. And I became an advocate and started something called the Charlie Foundation, named after my kid, Charlie, who's now 31, never had another seizure, because that became my passion, to let other people know who were in my position, in our position with a kid who was suffering from terrible seizures, that there was a way out of it.
And Jim, I just recently did an interview with Cameron Boyce's dad, Victor Boyce. Cameron Boyce, the star on many Disney shows and stuff, he suffered from epilepsy and he died from sudden death in epilepsy. And so I know his dad is a big advocate of that as well.
Cool. Yeah, cool. So I did, I know we're supposed to talk about airplane stuff, but
it's amazing how many people don't know about this. I mean, Jim, I'm sure that's what the foundation deals with, because people, even though you've been promoting this for 20 years and it was not promoted when Charlie first got epilepsy, but people still don't know about it, and doctors still seem to be ignorant of diet and nutrition as a treatment.
True. What I found is that there are powerful forces at work in our healthcare system that really don't prioritize health. They have other motivations like money.
And the drug companies want to treat these things with drugs and I guess the doctors with operations. So it's way overkill.
That's what I was shocked about when I did do the interview with Victor, about how little is known about it and how much attention is that, but how many people actually suffer from it is unbelievable. And I had no idea until I did the interview with him just how many people in our country that suffer with epilepsy.
Yeah, there's a world epilepsy population of 60 million people. Most of those people start having their seizures as kids. A tiny fraction ever hear about diet therapy, despite the fact that it was kind of invented at the Mayo Clinic in 1921. And it's been around for over a century now. And it stops seizures in about 30% of the kids who try the diet. And there's a significant improvement in another 30%. And those statistics have been solid for, as I say, over a century, but still it's grossly underutilized.
Is your son involved with the advocacy with you?
Yeah, he is actually.
He's given speeches, hasn't he, in front of conventions?
He just, and the reason I smile is because he just recently, there was a global meeting of scientists and doctors who are doing work in this area, and he sort of gave the introductory speech, and he talked about his life now and what it's like being seizure-free and drug-free and being able to eat now whatever he wants. And he was pretty funny too.
Amazing. And I'm going to roll that into this because one of the things I always talk about on the show is disciplining our children. I know you guys are always with the slapstick, with the humor, with the comedy, and sometimes could be difficult for the kids to know when you're serious, when you're not. But we'll start with you, David. What type of disciplinarian are you as a dad, especially being a dad, when you were older? What type of disciplinarian are you? And is that different than the discipline style you grew up with?
Yeah, very different. In fact, I learned a lot from my parents who did, a lot of things right and a lot of things wrong. And one thing I learned is that, your kids are going to screw up and you have to tell them when they're wrong. And but the important thing that I learned is to forgive them. You better forgive them right away or the next day. Because I was never forgiven. So, I worked it out by becoming a movie director and writer. So that was kind of a benefit, I guess. But, I just learned so much from my parents, and I'm only mentioning the stuff that they did wrong. And the other thing is they would give opinions on my girlfriends and they were always wrong. So I don't give opinions unless I see, this is an obvious serial killer. So you probably should not go out with this person. But you don't know as a parent, and you also really don't know as a friend what goes on in relationships. So I've kind of use that as kind of a guide.
Yeah, if the guy asks your daughter if she's ever been in a Turkish prison, there's a red flag there.
Yeah, that usually is your first clue. Yes.
How about you, Jim? What type of disciplinarian are you, and is it different than the discipline you grew up with?
Well, it's kind of just yesterday, my daughter and her 2.5-year-old son were here, and he just did a nutty. He just kind of lost it and started crying and all sorts of stuff. And I would like to have thought that I would have been a little stricter with him. That my daughter kind of coddled him and appeased him and what's not. And what I tell my kids more than anything is they're allowed to look at the way we raised them and pick and choose what they thought was effective. I mean, all of us, I think, as parents are doing the best we can do at the time. And we're going to make mistakes. The other story I tell my kids, I think more than any, and I'm not sure it ever sunk in, but is the story about the guy with the peanut butter sandwich, guy who goes to work every day and opens up his lunch bucket and there's a peanut butter sandwich. And he says, oh, I hate peanut butter. It sticks to the roof of my mouth. I don't like the way it tastes. I just can't stand peanut butter sandwich. And finally, one day, one of his coworkers says to him, well, why don't you tell your wife to put something else in your lunch bucket? And he said, well, I'm not married and I live alone and I make my own lunch. And I hear a lot of stuff where both I and my kids are complaining about stuff. But when you look back, we made our own lunch.
Yeah, wow. I love that. And David, I'm right in the same boat as you on the other side, because my father had me when he was 50 years old. So I was the youngest. He was born in 1930. So I grew up kind of with all of those comedies. He introduced us to the Three Stooges, Marx Brothers. So that's all we watched really growing up as kids, because he came from that older school generation. But his discipline style was vastly different than mine is right now with my kids. And I think, too, so many times, like whenever I ask that discipline question, a lot of the guys that I have on will say, oh, yeah, it's drastically different than how I grew up. I grew up with either, spanking or the switch, the paddle, the spoon, and I don't do that. I think our the way we view parenting now is that spanking a child is considered child abuse, when there's obviously a huge difference between spanking a child and beating a child.
Yeah, well, when I think, Danielle kind of taught me, you don't need to hit the kid at all. I mean, and that's my instinct was to hit him because that's how I grew up.
Right.
And I mean, not any horrible beatings or anything, but and we were able to do it without ever having to use that kind of physical punishment. And we also had the family bed. Our kids were never in a crib, so we just always had them there. And it really did change my life. Having the kids, and I didn't mind at all, because I mean, people, my single friends said, "Well, don't you miss going to the parties?" And I said, I really didn't. You have better stuff now. I love to be with my kids, and that's how I rolled. And also, I mean, the corollary is I avoided going to stupid Hollywood parties.
When I was a kid, one time I spit in my sister's ear, and so my mom spit in my ear, and I never did it again.
Yeah, that's one way to learn.
Yeah.
God, your mom was abusive. God, it's amazing you turned out like you did.
Don't get me started.
Yeah.
And how about it? And in terms of the values that you guys, what were the top values that you had hoped to instill in your kids as they were growing up?
I think we all kind of learned by example. We saw, I just saw how my dad, lived his life, and my mom, and they had such great advice. I mean, except when it came to girlfriends. But, my mom once told me, and I repeat this all the time. She said, always tell the truth, but don't always be telling it. So, and that just has been so useful. And then, my dad was such a wise man, but later I realized that, wisdom comes to a lot of people if you just live long enough. So I just thought, oh my God, he was so smart. But I later got to be just as smart.
Good stuff. How about you, Jim?
I think what I learned more than anything from my parents is that gratitude, to count your blessings, and gratitude is important, but gratitude is more than just saying thank you. Gratitude is giving back. And so what I learned from my parents, and it's not that they preached it, it's that they lived it, is that they would count their blessing, and they were always giving back to the community. They were involved in civic stuff and religious stuff. And it wasn't until they were gone, and I started to reflect on when I had my own kids and reflect on what kind of parents they were. That was always the example they set, though not what they preached necessarily. It's just the lives they lived.
Yeah, mine too. They didn't say you should give back or you should do anything. They just kind of led by example.
Yeah.
And with gratitude, I try to teach my kids or tell my kids that, like, a healthy person wishes for a million different things, but a sick person wishes for only one. And, so it's like you have a lot to be thankful for, and it's important to not miss that mark while we're asking for all these other things in life.
Absolutely.
Right.
And then sliding it back in here to Airplane, you guys, along with Jerry, you guys have the book, Surely You Can't Be Serious, The True Story of Airplane. It's a movie that I love, and I actually just over the summer showed it to my teenage. I have 4 kids myself. I have 2 teenagers. They're 17 and 16. Showed it to them for the first time. Just so awesome that I get a chance to share them with it. So take me back here through this. Now, was this you guys bought the rights to 0 Hour? How did this whole talk to me about the beginning, the origins of Airplane, and how this all came to be?
We discovered 0 Hour one morning when we were clearing off our videotape. We used to record late night movies, not for the movies, but to get the commercials so we could make fun of them. And in our show, in our Kentucky Fried Theater show at the time, which we were running in West LA. And one morning, we kind of lost interest in the commercials. We got kind of engrossed in this old black and white 1957 airliner in trouble movie called 0 Hour. And so that's how we thought, well, we could redub it, but then we thought, why don't we just recast it with, actors like Robert Stack? And so we started writing the movie, and we didn't know anything about writing movies at the time. So in a way, I suppose it could be kind of inspirational that we didn't know anything, and we were able to eventually do it by learning on the job.
Yeah, if not knowing anything is inspirational to people, we should be the gold standard.
Yeah, or I think we were going to say the poster child, right?
Both fine.
You could say that too.
Well, that's really how all fatherhood journeys begin. We don't really know anything. We think we know, and then we get into it, and all of a sudden we're like, okay, we learn on the job here. And so you guys, obviously casting the film here, Robert Stack and Leslie Nielsen, Peter Graves, you had such a huge cast in the film. What was it like? Were any of those guys dads when you guys went through the filming? I'm curious to know, like, what was Leslie Nielsen like, just to work with, and as a father, like, what was it like with Leslie?
Leslie was fun. He had this whole career of very serious movies, and we didn't know that he actually did have a great sense of humor. In fact, he was somewhat of a closet comedian, and he would bring this little fart machine to the set and make the other actors crack up in the middle of their lines, and it disrupted the whole set. But it was great fun, and Leslie had 2 daughters, and they ended up, and their kids ended up going to the same school as my son and daughter. So, and my daughter was in the same class as Leslie's grandson, and quite a talented kid too. He played the drums and was a singer, and they did talent shows together. So it was another Zucker Nielsen pairing.
When was the first time you guys sat down and watched the movie, or your kids got a chance to visit? I told you, I just watched it with my teenagers. They saw it for the first time, loved it, and it was definitely different than the comedy movies they had ever seen. What was the first experience your kids had to see in the film?
Well, with me, I showed it to my son when he was about 2, and all he remembers about it were the boobies, and and so then after that, we started watching a lot of softcore porn together, and he saw it as food. So that was a fun bonding experience.
How about you, Jim?
Well, I sort of remember when we were making the movie thinking, well, someday I am going to have kids, and I'm going to have to explain this to them. And then when my oldest kid was about 10, one day I walked into our TV room, and he was sitting there with 2 or 3 of his friends with the screen frozen on the shot of the woman whose boobs were very apparent. And I didn't have to explain anything. It was just, he got it.
But yeah, it's good, healthy stuff. Yes.
One of the most popular, scenes in the film, and I guess David, I can kind of tell who kind of wrote the lines for Adam Graves, Peter Graves in the movie there with the young boy.
Yeah. That's right. Of course, I that came out of my personal experience. Yes.
Yeah, I love that. There's so many things in the movie. Just when watching it, some of the subtle things, like even when she's talking about the play. Oh yeah, I just found a nice little spot for us by the beach. It's got mirrors on the ceiling, and she just throws that in there and just keeps going on. It's so many things in that movie that hit you, and you don't even realize it, like until you revisit it.
And Julie's delivery as an actress is so genuine and so innocent that's how we got away with a lot of those things. It wasn't salacious at all. And when she blows up the automatic pilot, it's Julie, and so she really is that person. She's very much that personality.
And some of the things I realized too that I had to explain to my kids, who like the Newt Rockney reference there, they didn't really understand what that was. So that led me to introducing them to Newt Rockney and say, hey, we got to watch Newt Rockney All American. And so it brings up those kind of things.
It's kind of fun every once in a while when I'm feeling bad about myself. They have these new on YouTube today. You can watch people watching Airplane for the first time. And it's so much fun to see their reaction, and lots of stuff, from 1980, like when Bob Hayes gets on the plane and he gets a ticket and she says, smoking or non-smoking. And people say, "Wait, were you allowed to smoke on planes back then?"
Yeah.
And despite that, when she hands Hayes the ticket, it gets a laugh.
Yeah, and all the reporters running into the phone booths. What are phone booths?
Right.
What were those?
Yeah. It's funny how so many of the things.
And it's cool about Newt Rockney. I don't know, I bet nobody gets that anymore. Newt Rockney and Notre Dame, and
for some reason, people barely got it in 1980.
Yeah, so now it's
Well, tell me about the book here. Surely You Can't Be Serious, The True Story of Airplane. Talk to me about the book a little bit. What can the readers expect? Available now. I'm going to put the link. Where's the best place for them to get it? And what can they expect when especially for the big fans of the film, what are they going to find out in there that they may not know about?
An easy way to get it is just go to theairplanebook.com, and that will direct you to anywhere that's easy to buy the book. And one reason why we wrote the book was because there's so many great stories that nobody knew, dating back to when we first started our theater back in Milwaukee and Madison, and then our trip out to LA and all the things that we went through. And one reason why we wrote the book was because our kids didn't know this story. They knew the headlines, like, yeah, we did this in that movie, but they don't know. And we really did want them to have this record. And I don't think anyone really close to us knew this story.
Right. And I think even though there's specifics of our story, hopefully there's stuff that anybody can relate to, not just fans of Airplane, but anybody can relate to about how they grew up taking chances or being afraid to take chances. So hopefully there's a larger theme than even just the details and the adventures we had and the laughs we had making Airplane.
And one of the things, too, that my kids realized as they watched the movie was that where I got so many of the lines that I had been saying to them for years, like, because it's one of the movies that I quote all the time, like, it's a big building with patience, but that's not important right now. Or I would just say these different lines and they had no idea what I was talking about. So as they were watching, like, oh, now we get where that came from.
Like, how do you take your coffee? And they wonder, what are you talking about?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely hit them with that one, too. But there's so many of them, great one-liners that are in that film. And again, so Surely You Can't Be Serious, The True Story of Airplane. The link is down there in the description below. And obviously, just, for any fan, when did you guys realize that this was going to become like a cult following for this movie? When did you realize that, man, this movie is more than what we thought it was going to be? When did it really skyrocket for you guys and you knew this was one?
We were always confident that it would be a big hit because we had been telling studios, and every studio in town turned us down before Paramount got it. We kept saying, this is going to be a hit, and nobody believed it. So then when it actually was a hit, we weren't surprised. However, 43 years later, when it's still, affecting people and people are quoting the lines and it's reaching new generations, this is the surprise to us. And it's
the other thing that it was a huge surprise for me is Will Harris did the interviews for our book, and he interviewed a bunch of celebrities, Letterman and Sarah Silverman, Jimmy Kimmel, a bunch of people who talk about how airplane affected them. And we're thinking, wow, I mean,
and we didn't know.
beyond anything we had ever considered.
Yeah, well, it's had a major impact on so many people. And one thing I'm curious to get your take on is for parents that have kids that are interested in writing, in filmmaking, the way that we consume media and movies and content is completely different from when you guys were on the scene. Now it's a lot of it is, consumed in gulps, like people binge watch these shows. And so, and the way that people are being discovered now is drastically different too. So what advice do you have for the parents out there that have kids interested in writing, filmmaking, and beyond?
Well, I mean, we always say, just do it. Do whatever you can do. I mean, everybody's got a cell phone. So you can actually make content, and it's all about content. It's all about, for us, originality. We weren't copying anybody else. We absolutely did new stuff, and we weren't afraid to try new things. And if you do some quality stuff, it'll find an audience. And I think you just have to keep going. Otherwise, I would advise, quit now, you'll never make it. But go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, and the other thing is, because we do all have cell phones and everybody can film anything all the time, but a huge part of our learning curve was we had this theater, and we would show our stuff in front of people who didn't love us, who didn't care about us too much, who had paid money to see it. And so they were really objective in their response. And if something didn't work, we learned how to fix it or how to cut it. And I think that's a real big part of the learning process. Is today kids or anybody who's interested, film it, but then show it to people, not your friends and relatives, but people who don't care, and get an objective response. And that's a big part of the learning process.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, really good point. And how did you guys drag Kareem Abdul Jabar into this film? What was that all about? How did you guys get him to do the movie?
A lot of it was pure luck. I mean, the first person we went to was Pete Rose, but it was baseball season, so he couldn't do it. So Kareem, like a lot of actors in the movies, was not the first choice, but it turned out to be such a gift because, we were able to write all that other dialogue for him because there was some controversy. And Kareem was regarded as this kind of quiet or aloof or sullen guy and with no sense of humor. And this thing completely changed his image. And he talks about it in the book, how it completely changed everything for him after Airplane. And he still gets hauled into the cockpit by pilots saying they want to tell people that they flew with Murdoch.
Yeah, I've been hearing that ever since I left UCLA. Like, that was a great part. And it was awesome to have him in the movie. And when they pull him out, he's so tall and his legs, he's got the Lakers shorts on. I mean, that was what a riot.
And the goggles, yeah.
All right, so surely you can't be serious. The true story of Airplane, link is down there below. Encourage everybody to go grab yourself a copy. And the last thing I want to hit you guys with here, I'd love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast. We'll start with you, David. What type of advice do you have for that new dad that's out there, or for that about to be father who's listening?
Don't listen to all the people saying, it's going, actually, they always say when they become teenagers or when they get to be 11 or 12, oh, you're in for trouble. But, you just, if you set a good example, they're going to get in trouble anyways. I got in trouble. My kids, got in the same trouble I got in. And so because of that, I didn't come down too hard at them like my mother did on me, because my mother never got in any trouble. So, I felt like I was a criminal, but, you got to go easy on them and forgive them. Always forgive.
Well said, Jim.
I've watched first my oldest son and my son-in-law become new dads in the last few years, and it's been an interesting experience. And my advice, I think, to anybody who's going to be a new dad is help as much as you can, because mom's going to be wiped out, and change as many diapers, sit there for as many feedings, and help as much as you can, because that first year in particular is really exhausting.
Yeah, very well said. I love the message. This has been an honor for me. David Zucker, Jim Abrahams, you guys are first class fathers all the way. Thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time here on First Class Fatherhood, and good luck. We're all counting on you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.